I want to say a huge thank you for your support and for tuning in today. If you are new here, you might not know how much I love Brene Brown. People talk about wanting to meet Oprah Winfrey. I just want to run into Brene at HEB. I'm not sure I'm not going to pass out, but I'm pretty sure I will be super excited. I have been following Brene's work since she first launched TEDx Houston in June 2010. And I think I discovered the TEDx talk maybe a few months later or a year later. And I was so fascinated with her work, started purchasing her books. I've read a lot of her work, and she is just truly, truly phenomenal. If you have never read any of Brene's books, I don't know what you're waiting for, but please just read at least one book. I can't even recommend a specific one, but Daring Greatly is probably my favorite. I don't want to say I have a favorite, but it's probably my favorite. Don't quote me because I might change my mind tomorrow. So today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about mom guilt. We're also going to delve into shame. Really, the episode is primarily about shame, and I'll tell you why.
Hey, Mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast.
A few months back, I had come home from work. I was super, super exhausted. It was during COVID, so my schedule had changed a little bit, and I was working shorter days, but more days. And so I came home, and for context, my husband, who had been traveling a lot previously, was now home a lot more than I was. My daughter had kind of gotten used to bedtime routine with my husband because before it was either bedtime routine with me or a bedtime routine with her nanny. And then when my husband was home on the weekends, we kind of just flip-flopped. So it was kind of 30% each of us. And then suddenly it was basically 100% Papa is doing bedtime. I come home from work and I'm super excited to put Bella to bed and, do bath time routine and all that jazz. And she says to me, I want Papa. Now, my heart just shattered into tiny little pieces because I felt rejected. If you don't know anything about the Enneagram, this might not make sense, but I am an Enneagram 2, which means I'm a helper, and helpers thrive on being useful and being helpful and being loved and being appreciated. And also we associate rejection as being less than or anything of that sort. So I went into this tangent and I was feeling so bad and I was feeling a lot of guilt, and my husband was very supportive about how I felt. But I started thinking, I feel guilty because I'm not home more. I'm not home more days during the week because I'm working 5 days a week instead of 3, but I'm working, shorter days. And my daughter now has a preference for Papa, and here I am. I brought you into this world and now I'm not your favorite person. I really, really felt bad. I share this story because I know that I'm not the only one that has ever felt less than around my child, and more so feeling like I had failed my child. It was really hard. And so I started to really hone in on mom guilt. And, there's a little twinges here and there of mom guilt, but this one I think hit hard for me because I just felt like I had failed her. Now, granted, we were in the middle of the pandemic. We were, our lives had been changed a lot. And I started feeling that I had really kind of sucked at being a mom. And then it was also around the same time I was home one weekend and I was just feeling like I needed a nap. I really just needed a break. And my daughter wanted to do something and I was just sitting there like, I just need to take a nap. In my mind, I wasn't saying it out loud. And something inside of me said, man, you really suck at this mom thing. And unfortunately, I paid attention to that voice And I went down this slippery slope of, I am really failing at being a mom. Why do I even have a job? Being a working mom is so hard. And in all honesty, I I felt like I was alone in that. It was almost the premise of how I started this community because I knew that I was not struggling alone, but I just wanted to hear the voices of those who were feeling the same things I was feeling. Fast forward, I came across a podcast episode and the person was discussing shame. And the more I listened to this episode, I realized to myself, wait a minute, this is not mom guilt. I'm self shaming myself. I'm telling myself that I'm less than and I am, not good enough and I'm not showing up for my daughter the way I should be showing up. I end up doing a lot of, reading about shame. And of course, Brene came in handy. Another podcast had addressed basically Brene's research, which if anybody of you that doesn't know this, she has been a shame researcher and she's based at the University of Houston. I wanted to share this episode in the same vein because it's the same research, so nothing has changed. But from my perspective as a mama in medicine, my perspective as a working mom who has struggled with how to navigate the mom guilt department and who has come up with some ideas of how I can navigate that and also share that with other mamas. I think we all could learn from each other. I want to define what Dr. Brene Brown defines as shame and what she defines as guilt. And if you're microtasking, mama, please come back to me and just hear me out. This part is very important because it's going to form the framework of what we're going to discuss today. Brene says shame is a focus on self. Guilt is a focus on behavior. Shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did something bad. How many of you, if you did something that was hurtful to me, would be willing to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake? How many of you would be willing to say that? Now, let me reiterate this. Guilt, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Shame, I'm sorry, I am a mistake. Just listen to that. How many times do you say to yourself, I'm really sucking at being a mom? Or this is so hard. Why am I not enjoying every minute of motherhood? I'm a horrible mom, or I'm not good enough, or I am not worthy, or I am not loved, or I am not capable. How many times do you think of that? Now, just a little, segue. Brene talks about how shame is highly, highly correlated with addiction, depression, violence, aggression, bullying, suicide, and eating disorders. Let that sink in, mama. How shame can actually build into depression, because I think many of us can relate to that. And taking it out on everybody, including ourselves and our spouses and our kids. Here's what you need to know more. Guilt is inversely related to those things. The ability to hold something we've done or failed to do up against who we want to be is incredibly adaptive. It's uncomfortable, but it's adaptive. Now, listen again. If you have guilt, you can basically hold it up against who you want to be and adapt, right? If you feel that you have made a mistake versus you are a mistake, you can say, okay, how can I show up better? How can I be more present? How can I show up as a better mother and spouse? How can I be more supportive to my kids? Versus, I'm a horrible mother. I suck. This is not what I thought it was going to be, right? How do you adapt to that? It's kind of hard to adapt to shame. Unfortunately, most of us, what we consider mom guilt, has been self shaming. And I'd like us to change the script and I'd like us to focus on how we can adapt. And this conversation is uncomfortable because it can feel like self-judgment and it can feel like discomfort, but I want us to sit in that discomfort for just a minute and give ourselves grace and say, you know what? I am not whatever, fill in the blanks. Instead, I did X, because what you did versus what you are two totally different things. Okay, so Brene's work really was on shame resilience theory. And this work, I believe she did in 2006. She basically wanted to create a working definition of shame and a conceptual identity of shame. So they did research, she and her team did research, and they wanted to generate a theory that was grounded in data that explains three things: why and how women experience shame, how shame impacts women, and the various processes and strategies women employ to resolve their main concerns regarding the impact and consequence of shame. So in doing so, they identified in this theory 11 topical areas that present distinct challenges for women. And I'm going to name them. So if any of these correlate to you, just, make a mental note. Appearance and body image, sexuality, family, motherhood, parenting, professional identity and work, mental and physical health, aging, religion, speaking out, and last but not least, surviving trauma. From the research, they came up with this definition of shame. Shame is an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. I'm going to repeat that. Shame is an intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. So some of the participants in the study, or most of them, used words to describe shame, including devastating, noxious, consuming, excruciating, filleted, small, separate from others, rejected, diminished, and the worst feeling ever. Let's go back to my mom guilt story. I felt rejected. I felt small. I felt diminished. I felt consumed by it. I felt that I was filleted open and my bare parts were laid out for me to realize I wasn't worthy. That's all shame. Now, in contrast, when the participants were asked to describe guilt, they defined it as a feeling that resulted from behaving in a flawed or bad way rather than a flawed or bad self. So in my situation, for example, maybe I wasn't being present. So I was not behaving as I was being present, even when I was there. Or, in the situations where you feel like you made the choice to do certain things instead of X, to your child seemed to be showing up, even if it was a fair choice to make as far as work or, showing up professionally. It was not it's not who you are. It's just a choice or decision or behavior. Make sense? So what they also realized was that the participants often experience shame as a web of layered, conflicting, and competing expectations that are at the core products of rigid social cultural expectations. And the shame web, I want you to imagine a square with a spider web inside of it. So it's a square and there's a spider web inside of it. Just visualize this with me, and please don't close your eyes if you're driving or doing anything that needs your attention. Just mentally visualize this with me. So on the left side of this square is where you should be. At the bottom of the square is who you should be. And then on the right side of the square is how you should be. Inside of the web are things like media, faith community, self, magazine, colleagues, partners, membership groups, mentors, health professionals, television, social media, I repeat. All those things are inside the spider's web. And in the very heart of the spider's web are these feelings that are three key feelings: trapped, powerless, and isolated. Now, stay with me. These things, the expectation, who you should be, or what you should be, or how you should be, is being defined by society, is being defined by your social setting per se, or is being defined in media, and you take that as this is what a mother should be, or this is who a woman should be. And basically, these social cultural expectations are narrow interpretations of who women are, quote unquote, supposed to be based on their identity. So that includes gender, race, class, sexual orientation, age, religious identity, and or their role, which includes mother, employee, partner, group member. So what Brene and her fellow researchers found was that these expectations are often imposed, enforced, or expressed by individuals and groups. So ourselves, our families, our partners, our children, our coworkers, groups that we're in, and they're the expression of these expectations are in turn constantly reinforced by media culture such as television, advertising, marketing, film, music, and print. And back in 2006, I don't believe social media was, where it is now. So I'm adding social media to the list just to drive the point home. So the concept of this web, again, still thinking about the spider's web, it illustrates how our options are limited and expectations are far reaching, and they're being reinforced everywhere we look, and they're being interwoven into our experiences and our relationships. The participants often found themselves in situations where feeling trapped was inevitable. The shame web entangled them with unattainable expectations or multiple conflicting expectations that could not be simultaneously met. Therefore, connections had to be severed or forfeited. The web is also a good metaphor for expressing the idea of feeling stuck and trapped, which really expresses in visual how these people felt. If you're trapped in a spider's web, you're really, really, really trapped. The second part of this shame resilience theory was now coming up with the components of shame resilience. How do people become resilient to shame? These researchers found 4 key aspects of shame resilience: empathy, connection, power, and freedom. Now, they described empathy using a description by Ivy and his colleagues who had done similar research about human connection. And they described it as the ability to perceive a situation from the other's perspective, to see, hear, and feel the unique world of the other. The research participants clearly identified experienced empathy as the opposite of expressing shame. The aspects of empathy that are important to think about is to be able to see the world as others see it, to be non-judgmental, to understand another person's feelings, and to communicate your understanding of that person's feelings. The participants said that in experiencing an empathic response to their shame experience, their sense of connection and power was often increased, restored, and sometimes strengthened. Think about connection, and I'm trying to interweave my fingers together, and just the fact that empathy kind of kept that lock. So if you try to pull it apart, there's no disconnect, right? And they also said that when they acknowledged that they engaged in self-empathy, because that is definitely a thing, they did increase their shame resilience, but not in the same way as connecting with others and getting that same feedback. So number 2 was connection. Connection was about mutual support, shared experiences, and the freedom to explore and create options. This allowed them to move away from the social or cultural trappings of the web shame by working with others to redefine what is valuable and important. And the individuals and groups that often enforce the social or cultural expectations that create shame for women emerge as equally capable of being a source of connection building for women. The same places where we feel judged and we feel shamed could also be the same places, if turned around, could be supportive to us. So I see that a little bit in mom groups where there's no judgment, and then, once in a while there is judgment. But if we could flip that around with each other and say, I'm going to practice empathy, even though this is not how I would parent, or even this is not how I would approach this situation, let me empathize with this person's situation and connect with them and support them. And one of my favorite groups is the CRNA mom group, because there's really a lot of connection. And that connection gives so much resilience to all moms because we're in the same boat, so to speak, and we understand each other. So we can come there and connect about a day in the operating room with how we felt when we left work. And we feel that the people who are in the group understand how we feel and can relate to how we're experiencing it. And this is also one of the reasons I started my Facebook group, because I wanted to create a community where these conversations around vulnerability were normalized, and I wanted to share content that was positive and supportive, but also to create connections between moms. So, number three was power. And power has three properties: awareness, access to choice, and the ability to effect change. Just as the participants' main concerns are best understood as the intersection of feeling trapped, powerless, and isolated, these four components, empathy, connection, power, and freedom from shame web, are interdependent and inextricably tied to shame resilience. So they're not separate entities. Just like the feelings are that you feel when you're feeling shame or shamed are connected, these four components are also not disconnected. So what the researchers came up with was these four aspects that were basically four continuum aspects that helped to reinforce shame resilience. So the first one was the vulnerability continuum, and it represents a level at which one acknowledges her personal vulnerabilities. And the theory proposes that women who experience shame in an area where they're aware of their personal vulnerabilities demonstrate higher shame resilience than women who experience shame in an area where they have not acknowledged their personal vulnerability, or in an area where they face personal invulnerability. So what this means is, say, for me, my personal vulnerability is built around sharing my journey as a mom and my experience with postpartum depression, postpartum rage. And so my shame resilience around that topic is really strengthened because I have been vulnerable with it, versus maybe I'm not always vulnerable about my perfectionist tendencies. And those are things that I'm working on. So I don't have the resilience set in that aspect because I have not addressed that. The second one is the critical awareness continuum. So this represents both the level of awareness a woman has about the social or cultural forces that shape her experiences, and her ability to critically assess her personal experiences in the context of those forces. So the theory proposes that there's a positive relationship between a woman's level of critical awareness regarding her quote unquote shame web and her level of shame resilience. So the more you're able to understand the things that make you feel shamed and create shame, and the socioeconomic contributions to that, social cultural contributions to that, you have a higher propensity to be resilient to shame. Number three is the reaching out continuum. This is the measure of one's ability to reach out to others to both find empathy and offer empathy. Now, I want you to pay attention to that, right? Where you reach out to find empathy is just as important as where you reach out to offer empathy, because we all know no man is an island. So if you're receiving but not giving, then you're not really fluid about it. And so this theory proposes that women increase their shame resilience when they're able to develop empathy and connection and reach out. The other thing is that if developing mutually empathic relationship is such a critical component of shame resilience, because when they interviewed these participants, they said that one of the most important benefits of developing empathy and connection with others is recognizing how the experiences that make us feel the most alone, even when isolated, are often the most universal experiences. I was interviewed on a podcast, and the plan on the podcast, we hadn't even really planned what we were going to talk about. And I shared my experience with postpartum rage and my first year of motherhood. When that podcast published, it was with Ali Casaza. It was on the Purpose Show. It was really amazing to me how many women reached out to me via DM, on Instagram mostly, because I think they had linked my Instagram. How many women reached out to me and said, I feel heard. I feel that I can put a name to the things that I felt that you shared how you experienced postpartum depression in a way that I hadn't thought about, because you were very clear that you were not sad. And that for me, I felt like my work was done, because even at the time I was going through, I knew I wasn't alone. I knew a couple of people that had gone through the same experience. But once I quote unquote came out, even with amongst friends of mine or people I knew growing up, I realized I had not been alone all along. All this to say, Mama, if you are struggling with any postpartum mood disorder or just struggling in your motherhood journey, this is not a cliche. You are not alone. You are never alone. We have to be able to recognize that our most private struggles are universal, and recognizing this leads to a second important benefit of reaching out to others. And if we all link arms and really support each other as mothers and women, we can go far. But if we sit and think that we are the only ones that are going through something, the reality is not. We're not. And I cannot emphasize this enough. You are not alone. Number 4 is the speaking shame continuum. So, speaking shame is about developing fluency in the language of shame. This allows women to engage in thought and dialogue about shame and shame resilience. Shame resilience requires us to know the words and concepts that give meaning to shame and the strategies of shame resilience. This continuum advocates about learning about shame in order for us to increase our social and emotional understanding of shame. So there was a quote that they included in the research, and it says, if we observe women's lives carefully without attempting to force our observations into pre-existing patterns, we discover that an inner sense of connection to others is a central organizing feature of women's development. By listening to the stories women tell about their lives and examining these stories seriously, we have found that, quite contrary to what one might expect based on the governing models of development emphasizing separation, women's sense of self and of worth is most often grounded in the ability to make and maintain relationships. When asked to deal about strategies to deal with shame, the responses to the survey, to the research by Brene Brown and her colleagues, the responses were too diverse to categorize as one strategy. But what they said was that they could characterize this as being with others who have had similar experiences or talking with people who've been there. And the most interesting thing was that the respondents to the research did not identify therapy as an effective shame resilience strategy, which was surprising to me too, just as it was surprising to the researchers. And they said that how they explained it was not that they didn't think that therapy was a bad thing or not important, because I am the number one advocate of therapy. But what they said was that the participants disclosed that they believed that needing to go to therapy in itself was a shaming experience. So they felt like if they said, yeah, I go to therapy, then it was almost like admitting failure or admitting weakness. And I thought this was such an important thing for me to address, because, mental health is not as a focus, especially for mothers, as it should be. And seeking mental health has this like stigma around it. And until we normalize those conversations about go to therapy, it's good for you, I'm doing the work, do the work on yourself. Until we normalize those conversations, then we are all going to be secretly going to therapy and healing and acting like we are quote unquote self-made when we have needed support. So I'm very honest about my therapy experience and going to therapy. I never thought I would ever need to go to therapy. And I actually consider my therapy appointments as self-care, because it's the one place where it's all about me. And as a person who is not, how do I put it? Again, as an Enneagram 2, I'm the giver and not the taker. It's kind of a way for me to kind of indulge myself and share my journey and get the help that I need, but feel that I'm being listened to and being heard. So In conclusion of this whole episode, I just want to talk about some of the ways I and we can help to promote this concept of shame resilience. And because we've addressed the components of it, and again, I want to repeat empathy, connection, power, and freedom. And in the continuum, there is vulnerability, critical awareness, reaching out, and speaking shame. How do we support each other? Number one, normalize vulnerability. We need to normalize holding space for each other to be. We need to normalize having conversations about, I feel that I'm failing, in order for us to tell each other, you are not a failure. You are doing the best as you can as a mother. And here's how you can improve how you feel right now, right? Instead of us, one, having this toxic positivity and telling each other, just be grateful you have children. Do you know how many people wish they had kids? And I honestly find that so discouraging, and sorry for being funny about it. But instead of doing that, supporting each other and saying, I hear you, I understand. I might not be going through what you're going through, but I hear you and I'm here to support you. The second thing is developing empathy. You do not have to go through the same experiences as I do, and I do not have to go through the same experiences that you do in order for me to understand your situation and in order for me to support you. And another example I can give as far as empathy goes is when maybe, for example, I have one child and some of my friends have 2+ children. And there are times I feel like, well, obviously I have it a little easier because I have one kid. And then, and then I have a conversation with a friend that has 2 children. And I'm like, oh, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. I can relate to that. And if I can't relate to it, wow, yeah, that's how you feel. Wow, I feel that for me. I feel that for you in terms of I'm not pretending to understand it, but I am truly, truly aware of your experience and I honor your experience. And here's how I can be of support to you, right? The third thing is how we can empower each other and help basically, like I said, the 3 components of power are awareness, access to choice, and the ability to affect change. And if we have awareness, one, we've given ourselves power. And when we spread awareness, we give each other power. So if you think about it as, lighting a match and the next, if we have connection, we light the match with the next match and it goes around and now we have, a huge flame. So as women, we have to be able to consider affecting change in terms of supporting each other so that when we support each other, then we're getting rid of the feelings of trapped, powerless, and isolated because now another mama feels, you know what, I'm not alone. I have support. Somebody understands me. Somebody gets me. Somebody understands my struggle. Make sense? The fourth thing obviously has to do with connection and freedom. What I want us to think about is how can we connect with each other in a way that we understand each other's journey, but we also share our vulnerabilities. One of the good things about, for example, closed group on Facebook is that people are able to share their experience or their story in a space where they feel heard, that you're not going to put on your wall and just put that out there. And the reason I say that, I'm going back to something that happened maybe around the holidays. Somebody posted on their wall that they felt, I forget the exact words, but she said she feels overwhelmed, and there was the word suicidal was used. And the comments were shocking to me because there was a lot of judgment. There was a lot of, how could you say that, type of thing. And you should be glad you have 2 children and they're healthy. And And in my mind, I was thinking, wow, what if we gave her the freedom from shame so that she can feel supported and so she can not feel isolated? Because basically, what these people are saying is, oh, yeah, you're over there, going through this. Yeah, we're fine over here. So we don't know how to help you. So my challenge to all of us is when we see another mama struggling, even though we don't know the exact things to say or the exact words to use, if we could consider connecting and showing empathy, then we are going to give them freedom from the shame web. So I know this was a lot of information. I know it's not fun things to talk about, but I really have strong feelings around mom guilt. And the reason I do is because a lot of the time, what we think is mom guilt is really shaming ourselves, or we are being shamed into that mindset of we are not worthy, we are not good enough, we are not grateful. And to sum up what I was saying about toxic positivity, I want to say this one thing, and I share this on my Instagram quite a bit. Gratitude and grief, gratitude and frustration are not mutually exclusive. The moment you start isolating gratitude because you shouldn't feel a certain way because, well, you have it so much better, that's comparative suffering. And the moment you start doing that to yourself or to other people, you are not serving them. And, taking away that ability to feel certain things because you have other things going well for you, it doesn't improve the situation you're currently in. So give yourself grace and remember these things are not mutually exclusive. You can be grateful and still grieve the fact that we have been in a pandemic for a year. We have not been able to travel. We have not connected with our families. But yeah, you can still be grateful you're healthy and you have a job. It does not mean that if you feel a certain way and you're in your feelings about the fact that you haven't seen your family in a year, that makes you ungrateful. It doesn't. You can be grateful and still be frustrated. So if you have anything that you'd love to talk about as far as this mom guilt topic is concerned and shame, I would love to hear from you on Instagram at stethoscopes.2.swaddles or on Facebook, Shiro Bergbauer. You can go on my website and connect on there. All my information is on there. And if you want some actionable steps of how to deal with mom guilt, I have a roadmap that kind of addresses the main components of how to navigate mom guilt. And you can find that at www.stethoscopes2swaddles.com/mom, MOM. Again, it's www.stethoscopes2swaddles.com/mom. I will see you next week. Have a beautiful week ahead. And remember, you are enough and you are worthy and you're doing a great job, Mama. Bye.
I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopes2swaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.